Hey everybody, Andrew Jordan just wanted to do a quick video about Isaiah 53. This is the second video in this series. In the first video, I explored the Targum Yonatan, which is the official Targum of the prophets and writing sections of the Hebrew Bible, and how the Targum, which is rabbinic commentary with the purpose of interpretation, or rather, is rabbinic translation with the purpose of commentary on the text, and how it used Isaiah 53 to show how the Christian interpretation of the text was incorrect. In this video, you can see on the screen, I'm starting with Isaiah 53, verse 3, because this is where the meat of the Christian apologetics begins. And it is important to, I think, always to note that early Christians did not use Isaiah 53 as a proof text for the notion that Jesus was Messiah. This came much later um, in terms of using it as a proof text. But let's look here. So I have three translations of the Hebrew Masoretic original. It's important to note that the Masoretic text, or a version of it, often called Proto Masoretic text, has been discovered from the first century CE. I don't recall the exact date off the top of my head, but it was found in the Masada caves. And so it was one of the traditions of the Hebrew Bible that was available at the time. It seems that there was a version of the Hebrew text that was behind the Dead Sea Scrolls commentary. um, there was a version of the text that was known to Samaritans and still is known to them. And there was also a version of the Hebrew text, perhaps behind the Septuagint translation into Greek, that differed slightly from the other texts. And those who know Hebrew will know that the variation in these texts is not actually in the what's called the consonantal text, which is what you see on the screen more or less. The large letters are the consonantal text, and these variations in among those four traditions are not in the consonantal text, but in the vocalic reading of the text. So the vowels are the small markings above and below the larger consonants. And because Hebrew is a Semitic language and based off trilateral roots, it does not use an alphabet. It used what's called an abjad, which is a writing system that only records the consonants of the language. The vowels shift sound and meaning based off what part of speech the word is, for example. So you'll have a certain pattern of vowels that is read to mean for example, the past tense, which in Hebrew is read typically in the most common pattern to be the vowels to the two ah sounds. So like katav means he wrote, etc. And then you'll have variations in the text. So to say she wrote, it would be katva, um, and etc. etc. So the variation in the ancient text is within the vocalic interpretations. The consonantal text is actually quite close because of the way that Hebrew functions. And the use of changing the vowel interpretation is something that the rabbis engaged in too, which would keep the consonantal text more or less the same, but change the vocalic reading, which would change the meaning of the text. So in the first, you'll see I have my own translation of the Hebrew, followed by the Jewish Publication Society, and then Young's literal translation, which I happen to like quite a lot. But more or less, the text reads something like this: He was despised, lacking among men. This is underlined because the Hebrew is not clear, and that's here Vahadal Ishim. Okay, Ishim is a strange form of this word, which usually used as a different plural, and it's not exactly certain what it means here, so that's why it's underlined. A man of many pains and knowing sickness, and hiding his face from us. He was despised, and we did not think of him. So this is my translation, and you'll see where I just made slight different uh, choices with how to translate things. Um, Perhaps the part here where it says Ish Machlobot, which I translated as a man of many pains. The other, I added the word many, so I should probably put in here um, brackets so that it's clear that it's not actually in the original text, but the word is in the plural form of the alt ending, which is feminine um, plural suffix. So the word many I added just to emphasize the number of it, and so that my text would resonate more with Young's literal over the JPS, Jewish Publication Society, which is the main Jewish translation of the Torah into English. JPS has suffering, so they have chosen a different translation of the word of the word for that I have for pains here. Knowing sickness, familiar with disease. These are just variations. The word here, vidua, is the participle form, like is you can see here in the differences of how it's translated. Acquainted with, familiar with. Knowing, I chose knowing because typically the root is used with the English word know in other contexts, so I wanted to maintain that consistency. Hiding his face from us. The Hebrew could be read um, the word mimenu. It could be from him, but because of context, we know that it's actually talking about the nu means referring to us. He was despised, and we did not think of him. And they're similar here. He was despised. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. We held him of no account. We did not think of him. Hashav is oftentimes translated think, so I just kept the consistency there. Young's literal translation has a particular way of translating the what's called the vav consecutive, which is the mechanism in Hebrew grammar that changes the tense or aspect rather of the verb when you put the vav in front of it. And Young's is known for not translating that in what we call perfect tense or past tense. I want to look now at Jewish commentary on this, and we'll start to understand what it might mean. I'm going to keep it so we can see Rashi, who is a medieval French commentator. So this text is built on a presupposition from Isaiah 52, which is that we're talking about the servant of God. And it's important to note that throughout the text of Isaiah, the people of Israel is referred to as the servant of God, which is the first thing that Rashi mentions in his commentary, is that the people Israel is the servant of God. So we're talking about here a personification of a group of people, the whole people of Israel, into one person, the so-called suffering servant. So when we're reading it, we should read this as the people of Israel, because that's what Isaiah tells us it means throughout the entire book. If you don't read the entire book and you just pick up in the middle, you might think it was talking about a specific person, but that would be a bad way to read any text. So we know that the servant is the people of Israel, and the second thing that Rashi mentions is the part where it says he hides his face from us, because of the shame and humility that the Jewish people have faced throughout their time in history. And that's what he's talking about here. So when we look back at it, we can say Israel was despised, lacking among men, a man or a people of many pains or suffering, and knowing sickness and hiding the people of Israel's face from us. Israel was despised, and we did not think of Israel. So it's talking about the other nations of the world vis-a-vis Israel. Let's look at Ibn Ezra, which is another medieval commentary from Spain, who ended up living in England after being kicked out of Spain. Um, he focuses on the part where it talks a man of sorrows, the servant of the Lord, which we know is the people of Israel. Ish is to be compared with the same word in a different phrase in a different part of the Torah. And so this has to do with the suffering that has been experienced by Israel throughout the diaspora, which has been for a long time, but intensified during the time of the Romans. We hid our faces from him. What does Ibn Ezra say about that? That the people turned their face at the sight of the Jew. And he was writing in medieval period when this was very much the case, that being a Jew was not something to be um, highly valued. Okay, so that is the Hebrew text. And two Jewish commentators. Let's just focus on a few other things. If we were to presume that this is a Christian interpretation, I think there's a few things that might be wrong with it. We could see perhaps the despised part in Jesus in the way that we see it in the um, text of the Gospels. However, it's also true that he was not despised by everyone. So it would be sort of in the middle with this interpretation. Lacking among men, again, we don't really know what the Hebrew is, so I always skip over that. If we're not certain what it means, we can't really base an interpretation off of it. A man of many pains, this is interpreted to be referring to the pain during the crucifixion, which I guess is, if you read it out of context, it could make sense. Knowing sickness, I think, is interesting because this is implying that someone is actually sick. And I don't think that it is within Christian theology to say that Jesus um, would be sick. I'm not sure about that, but perhaps it could be taken again out of context to mean that he was familiar with healing disease, perhaps. But again, to get to that, you have to take it out of context, which is bad interpretation overall. So let's look at the Greek just for a second. And I have two translations of the Septuagint here. And think it's particularly important to see how the Greek translates the part of the Hebrew that is unclear, that can help us understand it. So I like the new translation of the Septuagint. This is an older, I think, 19th century version. So I'll read the newer one. But his form was without honor, failing beyond all men, a man being in calamity, and knowing how to bear sickness. Because his face is turned away, he was dishonored and not esteemed. So you can see the Septuagint changes the meaning quite a bit. And here, I think what with the Hebrew that was unclear, we have a different way of perhaps understanding what it originally meant. I think the Septuagint actually adds a little bit of ambiguity um, into the Christian interpretation. His form was without honor. That's hard to understand what that means. A man being in calamity, that's pretty similar. Knowing how to bear sickness adds a different connotation to it. His face is turned away. What would that mean from a Christian point of view? I don't know. He was dishonored and not esteemed. So I think if you look at it out of context, you could get to the Christian interpretation. But I think knowing in context, particularly that Isaiah means the people of Israel by the servant of God, that I think you come to the interpretation that this is talking about the people of Israel. And I think that's probably why early on other texts were favored as proof texts over this one. But that's all I have for today. If you like the video, please like, share, and subscribe. You can check out my website at www.drajordan.com. Also, my book was just recently released, and you can find it on Amazon. Have a good week.